want to work at a FANG/big tech company, but you're not an engineer or computer science major, what do you do? Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got my job at Instagram as a content designer. For those of you who are unaware, a content designer is like a content strategist. So for me, when Instagram launches a new feature or wants to change an already existing feature, I decide the wording of it, I might decide how the placement of certain items look. I basically try to make sure that feature is as relevant and helpful to the users as possible. I am a designer on the retention team, meaning that when you sign up for an Instagram account, I make sure that you enjoy your time on Instagram, find it valuable, and you want to continue using Instagram. And for users who may not be very active, I try to make you more active. I'm going to divide the video into 3 parts. First, I'm going to talk about some quick stats about myself. Second, I'm going to talk about my journey through college, as Instagram is my first job out of college. And third, I'm going to give some tips to how you can potentially replicate my success. To start off with the boring, basic stuff, I was an English major at UCLA. I graduated with a 3.84 GPA. For the first years of college, I was a writer and host at my radio station, and then the last years of college, I made video games. Outside of school, I was an intern for NBC Entertainment. I was a writer at Grad magazine, which is an entertainment publication, and I also worked for a year at Grad, which is a mobile gaming startup about interactive fiction. I went into college knowing that I loved storytelling and writing, but it wasn't until my junior year when I started making video games that I grew an interest in working in tech. Now going a little bit more in depth into my college journey, specifically the things that I did which led me to working at Instagram, I 100% attribute that to my absolute passion and love for making video games. I've always been really curious about UX design, storytelling, and interactivity, so I became a team lead at ACM Studio, which is UCLA's club for game development. There, I made a ton of games about family and loss and love. Even though going into it I had no programming experience, no art experience, I still have no programming experience, in fact. I did it because I had this love for fiction and creating characters, and I really did not have any aspirations to joining a big tech company at the time. I did this all throughout my junior year, and as you guys probably know, junior to senior year summer is that big time when you're supposed to get an internship. Well, because of COVID and also my own inadequacy, I did not get an internship that summer. I was freaking devastated. And some of you guys may relate to me if you go to a good school like UCLA, where everyone's super successful and accomplished, and you barely got out of bed that morning. I was also going through a lot of personal things at the time, so for the very first month of summer, I was basically miserable. I lounged around my house, I felt sorry for myself, I didn't do anything productive. But then a part of me knew I could do better. I was hardworking, I had already interned at NBC, I was chasing my dreams of being a video game developer, so I decided to pursue that with full passion and fervor. And that's when I engaged in the most extreme networking frenzy ever. What I did was I looked up companies I admired on LinkedIn. So for example, Blizzard, Netflix, Ubisoft, you name it. From there, I looked up writers at those companies because I love writing, and I tried to set up coffee chats with them to ask them about their creative process and how they got started in the industry. I was learning a lot from people who were very established in the industry when one writer at Ubisoft told me, "Hey, have you ever heard of this company called Dorian? They're a startup writing interactive fiction towards young women, and you are a young woman and a writer. It kind of seems like a perfect match." From there, I reached out to the CEO, and she offered me a contracting job. For the next 10 months, I wrote short stories at Dorian, I managed their community, I did some UX work with their writing engine. It taught me that I really enjoy the mindset behind design, and part of the reason I like making video games so much is that I have to constantly think about the user. Fast forward a few months into working at Dorian, I realized I'm a senior in college now, and I should probably start looking for employment. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. I got rejected so many times, over 100 times in fact, and I was at one of the lowest points in my self-confidence. I had interviews at some of my dream companies. For example, I interviewed at Google, I interviewed at Sledgehammer, I interviewed at Riot Games, but nothing really worked out. Also note that in these months of looking for a job, I was still incredibly active in networking on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn was incredibly updated. I made a portfolio. I continued pursuing my love for video games. Until finally, about a month after I graduated, I received a message on LinkedIn asking if I was interested in becoming a content designer at Instagram. Because of my work involving mobile interfaces, as Dorian is an app, and my UX experience, they thought that I would be a good fit for Instagram. Now I'm going to go into what you can possibly do to better your position in terms of working at a company like Instagram, Facebook, Microsoft, etc. My absolute biggest piece of advice is to create an engaging portfolio. What I mean by that is don't just have a website that has links to things that you've worked on. Explain your collaboration process, how you made certain important decisions, and the impact of your contribution. More than just that, your portfolio is a highlight reel of who you are as an individual too, so feel free to have fun with it. In my portfolio, I have a dating simulator, I have a comic I wrote about a girl's unfortunate dating life, I talked about my favorite creating writing topics, all the things that I love. Giving your portfolio that personal touch can really make you stand out to a recruiter. I had some advice from an Amazon employee regarding my portfolio, and her suggestion was that for each project, write the context, your role, and your impact. And if you're someone who's never had an internship or feels like you just don't have anything interesting to put on your portfolio, I would highly encourage you to create your own personal projects. Companies want to see that you have initiative, that you can follow through on a project from start to end. Projects don't even have to take a ton of time. For example, participate in hackathons. For me, I did a ton of game jams. My second piece of advice is don't be afraid to pursue projects that you're genuinely interested in versus projects that you think you should do to boost your resume. As I said earlier, I legitimately have a dating simulator on my portfolio. While the work that I did and do in video games does not directly translate to what I do at Instagram, I was able to market my passion and how my work in video games and love for technology translated to skills that could be applied to my job at Instagram. What I'm trying to say is that somehow chasing what I love turned into a super practical job for me. Next up, on your portfolio and resume, you should totally 100% emphasize, bold, italicize, underline your contribution to the project and the impact that you made. So for me personally, when I make video games, how many people played the game? What rating did it get? What did people say in reviews? You also want to clearly specify what you did for the project. So regarding me in video games, I talked about how I was the team lead, writer, and social media manager. My last piece of advice, and what I personally think is the most important piece of advice, is to network your literal ass off. Don't be afraid to cold email or cold message people. Don't be afraid to ask for a few minutes of their time to give you career advice. Those people at the top were once where you were, incredibly stressed and confused, and they could give you some serious insight to what you can do to become them. And if it works out and they realize they have a position in their company, they have a friend who's looking for a role, they could possibly refer you to that as well. And I know for some of you shy people, it can be super intimidating to schedule a meeting with an absolute stranger, but if they're meeting with you, they're probably going to be super nice and accommodating. The worst someone can do is say no or ignore your message, and that's okay. It was actually through networking that I even discovered what content design is. At the time, I had a mentor who was a product designer at Facebook. She heard a little bit about my background and she said, "Hey Emily, how would you like to work in content design?" And now I am working in content design. That concludes the advice that I have, but to summarize, be your own boss, take initiative on your projects, and market yourself. The job market is scary and stressful and filled with a lot of disappointment, but hopefully some of these tips empowered you. If you have any questions about what I specifically do at Instagram or just questions in general, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll reply. I also plan on making more videos on my channel about design and my job, so feel free to subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.